What if justice wasn't just about systems, but about the soul? Welcome to the Spiritual Justice Show with me, Eric S. Lee. You've heard me say it before. For too long, we thought restorative justice alone could save us. But repairing harm without changing systems doesn't end the cycle. Social justice fights for equity, but without spirit, the work becomes a grind. Transformative justice seeks culture change, but without compassion, it struggles to hold. Spiritual justice completes the circle. It heals the heart while changing the system. It restores dignity while shifting culture. It brings spirit back into justice. Each week, I'll bring together leaders, healers, and change makers to explore a new vision of justice: restorative, transformative, and deeply spiritual. And people like you, spiritual justice warriors who choose courage, compassion, and creativity in action.
Executive Director, Full Circle Restorative Justice. He leads transformative work in criminal justice system schools across Colorado's 11th Judicial District. But you see, justice and spiritual justice is not held to a district. It's not held to a system. It's not held to a person. It is something that is so systemically important that when we do this show, and you're going to hear lots about this show from everybody, that this is something that Eric has created, which is not just unique, but is necessary. Today, the vision is clear, and the vision has to do with school systems, with God-given strengths, with rising above circumstances, and discovering a purpose. But how do you do it if you don't have support? Many of us have been through so much, so much. You know, we've seen our businesses collapse. We've seen things break down in our lives, but yet here we are. You know, the other day we introduced a new logo for not a logo, let's just say an image stamp for the network, and it's this incredible phoenix rising, and in it has a landscape of a cityscape inside the phoenix. And so today you're going to find out what that means, because when you think things are failing, you have to really ask the question, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Eric, great to have you kicking off the show. All of the above, right? Spiritual
Dr.
justice
Pat, here we are.
warriors.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you today.
Good to see you. Um, this is the first of many conversations, but it's a really important one. And I gave people just a brief snapshot of you, but I'm going to ask you a question that I've asked everybody pretty much that I've had a conversation with in 22 years. And it has to do with who we are and how we get here. I just shared a little bit about you, but here's the real question people want to know. Given everything you've done and who you are, what challenges and obstacles did you have to overcome to bring you to this very moment?
Dr. Pat, great question. And I didn't know the question was going to come at me like that, but I love that you came with the question. Like you should have been pitching for the Mariners and the Blue Jays with
Oh,
that
yes.
curveball, because you would have got them to strike out.
You know, I wouldn't have asked you the question if you and I hadn't spent so much time together. But can you
So
imagine being
listen,
a guest on
here's the
my
deal.
show? And I've asked every guest on my show that, and they never knew that was coming. But it's our story, isn't it?
I love it. And the answer that I'm going to give to that question is why spiritual justice is so important to me, and I think to the planet. It's why the restorative justice work that I do now is so important. It's why spirituality is so important to us and so many. And that is you I think you know the answer to this question or have an inkling of how I'd answer it. Because the biggest obstacle was me.
Yeah.
Now, it gets more complex than that. And I think we have about a year at least, twice a month, to talk about the nuances and the details of what that means and how that relates to the systems that we're swimming in and the systems that fortify our beliefs and our behaviors and all of that. But bringing me here today and why I'm able to do this work and bring this message today is a deep overcoming of myself and who I thought I was and for a long time who I thought I am as it relates to life and walking around on the planet and what I felt like I was capable of and all that. So that's the first answer.
Things happen. They just happen. So I was reflecting on this earlier to think about, why am I surprised? Why should we be surprised when you are coming out and you are talking about something like what? Spiritual justice? We're going to have surprises. But here's the question for you, really. It really has to do with how did your life prepare you for this work? Because I don't know about you, but people like look at me and they question my credentials. They question like, what is that woman? What is she doing? You must have gotten the same. Maybe not. Tell me the truth now.
I took, it's funny because I did an interview a while back and someone framed me as a criminal justice reform expert, and framed it as I had been doing this work for my entire life, and I had to stop and correct them, and really say, I appreciate those credentials that you just placed on me, but really I'm a career mutt. My career path has gone to a lot of different places. I've been an entrepreneur. I've had self-practice through coaching. I've had jobs, and now I'm in nonprofit doing nonprofit work. And the biggest credential that I believe that I have is as a quest and an enthusiasm to learn. I have a deep curiosity around systems and how they impact people. I have a deep curiosity and have done extensive research on how trauma-informed behavior influences human behavior and how we respond in our belief systems that drive us later in life. And that has all led me to where I am today. Being a successful business owner, that was, I think, one of my first real credentials that I achieved, and I was able to do that as a person of color in a predominantly white area in Boulder, Colorado. And from there, doors open. It's like I'm like the leader of an organization, co-leader. I had a partner at the
Yeah,
time, and I'm the only brown face in the room, and I'm leading a bunch of majority faces, right? And it's
yeah.
like it set me up to understand both myself and human nature a lot better. And, a lot of the narratives that are around race relations and who can do what and who's being discriminated against and why, and all of these impacts that are going on, I was able to kind of live in that stream and live in that environment and really study it and how it was impacting me and how it was impacting others, and really make determinations on my own that weren't really based on, yeah, we need to look at studies, we need to listen to the experts, we need to look at the data.
Yeah.
But anecdotally, I was able to experience these things, and it established an expertise in a lot of areas that helped me today do the work that I'm doing.
Well, I mean, let's talk about this. You and I grew up in cities, right? Not saying who's got the best pizza. We can debate that. Definitely know who's got the better football team. I'm not even
That
going to
that
go
that that
there.
we
Not
got a
going
whole we
there.
got a whole couple shows
That's
about
it.
those things, young
Yeah.
lady.
Yeah. But growing up in those cities, um, there are stories about how we grow up and we become who we are, like you and I, people looking at us today, like a lot of people looking at us right now. And I didn't want to share my story. Look, Eric, I've been doing this 23 years. I can count on one hand how many times I've actually shared my story. I share clips of it. But the survival of pain, all of that, that grit had to teach you, as it did me, about humanity, don't you think?
Oh yeah, and humbling, and that's something that I really, and thank you for bringing that up, because every so often I need to reflect and go back to my humble beginnings, and the inflection point in my life that set the impetus of where I'm today, and that's as a young man, streets of Detroit, strung out on crack cocaine, going nowhere,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And something happened, and it was like, okay, this is not the life
yeah,
that you really need to be going. I had a talk with my mom who had gone through the same thing. I mean, I had to, I experienced both of my parents and their drug addiction and use of heroin, and my mom sees me going down this path and, kind of pointed me in the right direction. She didn't know how to lead me in the right direction,
yeah,
but she pointed me in the right direction. She had the presence of mind and the brilliance within herself and the self-awareness to say, hey, I don't know what the heck you need to do exactly, but here are some people
yeah,
that can help you,
yeah,
and pointed me to a therapist in Detroit, um, you know, 12-step programs and the whole 9 yards, that actually, and Unity Church, which really led me
yeah, me
immediately
too. Mm,
into my spirituality, because the Unity Church in Detroit, they had a Wednesday service that had Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer and and Eckhart Tolle and all these big. So I was immediately coming out of the darkness of who I was, into the light of who I could be with some of the most high flying thinkers on the planet.
mm,
And it really pointed me within and pointed me to the possibilities of who I could become. And, that was 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, and it's still a journey, and there's still lessons every day, and,
mm,
and things to overcome internally and externally every day. But that was the inflection point of just being pointed in the right direction by the right people, um and being able to be lifted
yeah,
out of that toxic environment.
yeah. I think, see, all of this that you and I are talking about leads to the creation, or let's just call it the turning point, where you looked at the landscape of this and you ask yourself a question: what's working? What's not work? What about social justice? What about restorative justice? What about transformative justice? What about all of those? Are they working? Are they not working? Wasn't that a pathway, those questions, for you developing spiritual justice?
Yeah, I am fortunate to have 4 children. And one of my great, and they all are my great teachers, right? They all teach me something different, um, every day, including now taking another step into grandfatherhood, right? But my daughter, particularly, grew up very rebellious. And she was the first in our family to really be a social justice warrior. I mean, as I was developing and overcoming and being this successful brown person in this all white environment, and she's screaming, we need to tear the system down.
Mm,
We need to tear it. We need to burn it and build something else, because this sucks. That was her. And me, as I had become a coach and looking at my path in my life and thinking, okay, yeah, that's great. And that's work for a lot of good people. And my focus is on human development and what we can do as individuals, and how I can coach both myself, or get the coaching for myself, and coach others, mentor others about building the strength and resilience within ourselves to overcome whatever system comes our way,
Mm.
right? And so there's that, you can
That
see
takes
that
some, that takes
conflict
it.
of
Yeah.
philosophies going right there until later on in life, she recruited me to be a restorative justice facilitator. And then that wasn't a debate or anything. It was like, hey, Dad, you're this coach, you got this wisdom. We've got this restorative, and she worked for a restorative justice organization in Denver. We really need facilitators, and we think you'd be a fit. And when I trained and began to take cases, it clicked. Then there was another inflection point, and the inflection point was my belief and passion for human development and personal growth, and how that intersected with social justice and creating a system, restorative justice, that went beyond all of the pratfalls and all of the failings of the systems, some of the systems we have in place. And that's when it began to really forge. It was, my spiritual path, it was my personal growth and development path and coaching. And then, okay, here's how that can interface with a system to help uplift, because the work we were doing was mainly with youth. And so it's like, okay, we can catch these youth at a very young age and show them who they really are and what they're capable of, while at the same time transforming a system. And I want to say this about transforming a system, because I talked about how my daughter wanted to really burn down the system, destroy it, and all that stuff. And I came across a quote a while ago, which really guides the restorative work that we're doing and that we're trying to accomplish. And it's by a scientist. His name is Buckminster Fuller. And his quote is this: "You don't change a thing by fighting against it. You change a thing by building a model that renders that old thing obsolete." So that became the quest through restorative justice, being in the court system, in the schools, in the community, how we orient our youth to life. That is a different system than the one that's working. And if we can continue to build and perfect that,
Mhm.
it's like comparing a Ferrari. Actually, I'm a C8 Corvette guy. It's like comparing that to a horse and buggy. And which one are you going to choose?
Mhm. Now, let me give you my Harley Davidson question, because for most people out there, they don't have a clue about what restorative justice is. When we talk about it, I guarantee you that we have to enlighten people to say, do you folks, you may not think that what we're talking about here impacts you. But what are we talking about? Because I got asked a question the other day when I was telling, you're going to laugh at me. We got to laugh a little bit. And I was telling somebody about the show, and they said, well, what the heck are you restoring? And I'm like, okay, you just need to listen to the show. But it's a very valid question, because most people don't understand what's involved in this work. And yet, I can see the work you're doing with youth. So let's give people a snapshot of the world of restorative justice now. And then when we come back from break, we're going to talk about how we transform that. But people don't know. They're like, what are you talking about?
That's great, Dr. Pat, and thank you for saying
They
snapshot,
don't know.
because we do an intro training. It's intro to restorative justice and restorative practices. That's 4 hours, and we don't talk about process at all. We just talk about mindset. And so I'm going to give you a snapshot, and just an understanding so people know what we're talking about. And then as we go, I'm sure we'll go deeper into nuances and this and that and the other thing. And I'll also tell you a little bit about how full circle restorative justice does its work around this as well. And so most people who are familiar with restorative justice at all are familiar with it through the criminal justice system, and know it as an alternative to the current traditional justice system. And it gives offenders, we call them responsible parties, the ability to take responsibility for harm they've caused
Yep.
and repair that harm. Now, we primarily work with youth in the system. We're contracted with the DA's office and the 11th Judicial to work with youth, to
Yep.
give them the opportunity to take responsibility for harm caused and repair that harm. And if they do that, they are not, or if they have a criminal charge, it's dismissed. If it's a direct referral through law enforcement, then they never get a charge in the first
Yeah.
place. And so, one of the differences between restorative justice and the traditional system is the traditional system is based on laws and rules. It's like stuff that may have been written 50 years ago. If you do this, this is your punishment. If you do that, that's your punishment. And that may or may not be appropriate to that particular case. Where restorative justice is really relationship based, there'll be a facilitator, a co-facilitator, a couple community members to represent the community and how those harms affected the community. Um, and then that person gets to sit in that room, sometimes with the person they've harmed, and really in a relationship based setting in a circle, we'll call it a final circle when we do it, has to look that person in the face, in the eye, and own up to what they've done. And the group, again, it's a community process, the group determines how these harms will be repaired.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
want to,
those
but listen.
relationships are then
Mhm.
restored.
Thank you for saying that, because here's the difference. The reason we got to talk about it is because we're watching a lot of these television shows. Law and Order 1, Law and Order 3, Law and Order SVU. And they're great shows because they're informing people of what really goes on. And so, what I want to make a distinction about is one, when they're standing up in the court and they're getting ready to be sentenced or whatever, there's like a 17-second blurb that comes out of their mouth as if everything's going to be erased. That's not this. The second thing is, you mentioned 12-step program. You and I have that in common. And before COVID, we were like, I got in so much trouble for talking about these programs, but I talked about it. And part of that process, you go through a fourth step and then a ninth step where you have to make amends to people. That is a journey. There are some people that cannot do that. It takes them years. And it's not apologizing. See, what I love about forgiveness is that people don't know what that means. It doesn't mean we're condoning an act at all. But what you're talking about is accountability. And that is not easy for
Yes,
people, is it?
right. Right. Dr. Pat, thanks for bringing that up. And there's another piece that is really crucial and really points us to spiritual justice as well. And you heard me say, and I said it a couple times, just so people really get it. There's the acceptance of responsibility for the harm caused and the willingness to repair that harm. And these are the indigenous practices. This isn't something we made up. These are things that have been
Right.
going on, in this country, in New Zealand, and all over the world with indigenous peoples for thousands of years. And so we are just, wising up and saying, okay, well, maybe we need to get back to our roots. So anyway, my point though is this: in those harms, one of the things that we've learned and recognized and focus on is their self-harm. There's self-harm that drives the act, and a lot of times there's self-harm of that responsible individual that they're actually harming themselves in the act of harming another. And so as we go through the process of repairing that harm, we make sure, and it's tangible. When we go through the process, this isn't some airy fairy thing. It's a contract. We call it a healing agreement. Gets formed with 3 to 5, 6, sometimes 7 actionable items to repair that harm that we follow up on to make sure that they're done.
Yeah.
And sometimes half of those have to do with that person addressing the harm that may have been done to them earlier, or the harm that came from them to them in the act of harming someone else.
Yeah. Look, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's happening to our youth right now. And what about this? Why should spiritually conscious adults care? Why should adults care, period? But what's the bridge now between what Eric has just talked about and now what he's creating. When we come back, we're going to talk about spiritual justice. We're going to talk about what it means, what Eric has launched. Of course, I said before, this is a calling. This is not a template. This is not something you pick up and you read about. This is now something being created to, in my words, not Eric's, to fill a gap. And there is a gap. When we come back, we're going to hear what that gap is, and so much more over the weeks and the months that you're going to hear about this. But the main question really is for all of you out here to think about is, are you ready to allow healing? And I mean it. I mean, when I say allow, I mean allow, because I'm telling you, y'all have the ball in your court. These folks, these young people can jump through hoops of fire, but we need you in the community. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about what's happening with our youth and why the very literal sense of justices, all of them, is not going to get at the root. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Look at this is an incredible introduction to an amazing show. For those of you out there, this is Spiritual Justice with Eric S. Lee. I'm Dr. Pat, and we get to take this journey here for at least one or two shows before Eric really kicks it up and invites a whole lot of other really amazing people. But today we're talking about spiritual justice. We just got done, Eric, talking about several other forms, restorative, a little bit on social, a little bit on transformative. But the question really boils down to, the next step in our spiritual evolution and what we're doing and trying to understand for our young people right now. So where are we? And give us the why about spiritual consciousness.
So thank you for that. Thank you for that. And this, I'm going to talk about my personal experience, and I'm going to talk about the experience of other people that I have talked to and that I've worked with who have had similar experiences on this. And I talked earlier about my personal development and my trials and tribulations and overcoming, and then my arc of growth. And really deeply, I mean, I'm Dr. Pat, for 30 years, I have been completely immersed in spiritual growth and exploration, just every which way. I have meditated every morning for at least a half an hour for the last 30 years. I don't think I have missed a day. And so I'm just committed to it. And if you go on YouTube, you go online, you see this spiritual program and you see this spiritual guru, and you get this way to meditate, and you get this manifestation technique. And people are searching, it seems sometimes, for that final piece. And for me, that final piece was taking that wisdom, taking that peace, taking that spiritual connection that I have formed through practice through all these years, and sharing it with young people.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and it's like there has been several occasions, and not too many people that I know are blessed enough to have this experience. I was in a training, and I was with a group of teachers who we were training on restorative practices in their school. And as I was talking about it and going into detail about their practice and their work that they get to do with these young people, I began to sob. And my tears was not sadness. It was joy that I got to be in this room with these people and all of these souls who are going out to uplift others. And I was a part of it. Then there was another, I run a nonprofit, and part of my job is getting funding, which is the hamster wheel of nonprofit work. It never ends. And a funder wanted to meet me in person so that I can address some of the questions and concerns that they had. And she asked me a question. I can't remember exactly what the question was, but the question was about and I quoted Dr. King, I don't think I'm a Dr. King, but through this work and through this system that we are transforming, I see how we can transform the world. And what I quoted from Dr. King was this: I have seen the mountaintop. I may not get there with you, but I have seen how this system transforms souls. And if we can collectively transform this system and continue to uplift these young souls way, we will create a completely different way in our society, a completely different world that we live in. And as I told her that, and I talked to her about, yeah, 5 years ago I was thinking about retirement, and now retirement is not on my agenda because I got this spiritual justice work tied to this restorative justice work, and I will take every last step doing this until I cannot take another. And as I said that to this funder, again, I began to weep. And as I began to weep, Dr. Pat, that funder began to weep. You think we got that grant? We got that
Yeah.
grant.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about getting the grant, though. It was about what I felt connected to inside. And that was taking this connection that I had forged over 30 years and giving it to someone else, to giving it to these young people, to embedding it in a system that uplifts them and gives them a different way of being. That's the spiritual justice work.
Yeah. You cannot, in my opinion, we cannot, you cannot, I cannot, people out there cannot take on this type of work without passion. It's the thing that fuels you to keep going beyond the day to day, beyond the challenges, beyond you wake up one day and somebody outside, some system, some other person outside just does something that makes no sense. And yet you have to have what you just described in order to pass the baton and create spiritual justice warriors, don't you?
Yeah. And so it's that piece of creating a community and a society that has that as its foundational principle, one that is one of connection and inclusion and belonging, a whole climate and culture of that. And at the same time, that and taking those actions really triggers in us a level of enlightenment that I and many others have not experienced until we began and turned the switch outside of us. Because all of them, and I am into spirituality. I am to self-reflection. I am into inner work, and it takes inner work to get to where we need to get to. But for many of us, the final piece that triggers a joy and a sense of enlightenment that you cannot, I mean, you can experience it worldly because I am, and many others are. But unless you share it, it stays within you and it
Mm,
doesn't get ignited.
yeah. Yeah. All right. Look, everybody wants to know why. The why. Let's talk about what's going on with the youth because this is the why. This is what's happening in the world today with our youth. And for those of you out there, I'm not saying it's not happening to adults, but there are some statistics, some information about what's happening in the world. Not to mention, at least in the circles that I'm in the greater Seattle area, some of the cuts to Medicaid and some of these other things, it has just created a nightmare for people, especially some of the young people who count on funding for their drug recovery, whatever they're in. And even if it doesn't impact, the level of anxiety is just through the roof. What are you discovering? What are you seeing? What's going on in the population there with the young people?
So, there's, and I don't want, there's so many statistics out there. And I'm just gonna focus on a couple things and the ones that kind of drive and inform the work that we do. The first is we have a mental health crisis in this country as well.
Oh, yeah.
And along with that, and these are statistics, the first three will be from the World Health Organization. 50% of all mental health or mental health problems begin prior to age 14. 50% of mental illness begins prior to age 14. And so that's telling us if we want to stop it, if we want to get to the root of the work, it's in our young people. And so then the other thing that we recognized in our work is that 20% of 13 to 17-year-olds experience some kind of anxiety disorder. And with that, another 20%, and we don't know if there's overlap. So this could be like 40% if you add them together, because it could be all of them. 20% of 13 to 17-year-olds experience intense bouts of loneliness. That's disconnection. And that affects their grades. I mean, 22% of that says that it adversely affects their grades. And really the grades piece, though, it's an indicator, that's not the important thing. What we see is that those are some of the driving factors behind them acting out and having to have us work with them in the judicial system, which we don't want, which is why we've kind of shifted our work towards the schools to develop preventative programs to help develop them from getting there in the first place. And then you want to talk about the school to prison pipeline. It's like, you know, kids who are suspended from school are 3 times more likely to drop out of school by 10th grade. And then 3 times of kids suspended from school are, or kids suspended from school are 3 times more likely to end up incarcerated sometime in life. And generally it's within 10 years of them leaving school. And there's a lot of reasons. We'll have time to go into some of the reasons and the details, getting granular about why that is. But those are numbers. I mean, that's the data that's driving this work and the need for it. And then this is more anecdotal, but when we talk to people who have been criminally charged or people who are incarcerated in prison, a lot of times they are that way because early in life they got a charge and they were labeled a criminal
Yep.
and they lived into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, they
that's
can't
the
get
beauty
away
of the
from it
restorative
though.
justice piece, is because, yeah, we get
Yeah.
to divert them away from that labeling. And no, we don't believe that a person's worst act
Mm,
should define them forever. And that's a key foundational principle of restorative justice. It's like, no, we want to point you to your
mm.
authentic self, have you repair this harm, repair yourself, begin to heal. And then we'll talk about Viktor Frankl later.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We'll talk about Victor a lot. But the bottom line is you can't get away from it. So let's just be realistic about it. Now, there are some crimes, there are some things that happen here that have a label for a very specific purpose to help people in the public. We're not talking about that. But you can't get away from it. I mean, look at the crimes one of the things I want to get back to, and this is somebody you should have on your show. One of our hosts is starting his own show, and it's Brian Jones. And Brian is a behavioral health subject matter expert. However, he takes on something nobody's really looking at. This is the guy that goes in places and says, you need to build facilities that are high quality projects. This is the guy that says, you're all these programs work, but if you're not building facilities that people can go to where they can restore. So he's somebody you're going to want to have in the show, because when you look at that model versus some of the facilities we got here, and you know what I'm talking about, it is extremely difficult for anyone. I don't care who you are, you or me, to get well and heal if your environment is awful.
Yes.
And so part of this is creating a system. But none of this matters without the spiritual component, right?
That's where I'm at. It's like, what is driving us? What is the motivation? What is driving us? There's a lot of good meaning people. And we interface with religious organizations, we get support from churches, we get support from people who just don't go to church and just feel like they're connected spiritually. And without action, faith is death, right? And so we really want to align that spiritual drive, that spiritual development, that spiritual enlightenment that we are working for, that so many of us are seeking, and turn it into manifested works,
Yeah.
something that we can tangibly point to. And I'm not, saying necessarily it has to be a building or anything, but something that's outside of ourselves, that's that
Hmm.
connection.
Yeah.
And again, it's like we can talk about the spiritual nature and what we believe about God and unity and all of this stuff. Um, um, and it's all connected. It's
But you
all
defined it
connected
earlier when you
because
talked to the
God
indigenous
can't know us.
people.
God can't know itself without us.
But didn't you refer to this earlier in the show when you said, look, we're talking about things that have been practiced in indigenous people. We're looking at taking these
Yes.
practices, these rituals, we're bringing them into a sacred space. Because part of what, I know about what you do and what you're going to talk about in other shows, this is one of your quotes. We're not saving youth, we're evolving them and saving ourselves. But you can't do that under systems and processes that don't work. But when we're talking about the spiritual practices that you mentioned earlier, and of course, you'll do more shows on this. We're talking about what I know when we do the 9-month coming of age program for these young people. We're talking about putting something in place that gives them a chance to explore their potential, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. And it's beyond economics, it's beyond politics. I mean, we have backing with conservatives and liberals and independents and libertarians. I mean, there's concepts with the spiritual justice and sub restorative justice work that we do that touches the heart and touches that spiritual aspect of everyone. Even if you don't have a spiritual orientation, if you're agnostic, or you don't believe at all in a God or a higher power, there's principles here that are spiritually based that everybody can buy into and agree with.
Mhm. Mhm. So let's talk about this for a minute. I want to talk about the fact that we also need some spiritually awakened adults. So far, we've been talking about young people, but you and I both know that this is a circle. We're all connected in the circle, aren't we? How so
Yes.
far have you seen your programs impact the adults that maybe they're not participating, but maybe they're observing? What are the adults looking at and saying about what you're doing?
You know, we have a program we just did called Own It, Change It Day. And it's a day-long social emotional learning workshop for students. And it's really volunteer intensive. And it's, one adult for every four kids because, it's a big party, it's fun, it's interaction, it's connection, it's these things. And then there's real conversations. And we want an adult to facilitate a conversation with not a whole lot of students. And we're mentoring and we're modeling vulnerability as adults when we go through these programs. And by the end of the day, the kids following our lead are able to open up and really feel safe to share their authentic selves, to share their authentic experiences. And it's a lot of them are heavy, right? And it's a load off of them at the same time. And it also teaches them empathy and compassion because they didn't have any idea that their classmates were going through these things. And kids who are bullying other kids say, "Oh my God, I'm bullying this kid because I'm going through this stuff, and this kid's going through something similar." And there's like catharsis in the room for these kids and for adults to participate and facilitate that. Again, there's passion, there's tears, there's connections, and there's a realization by these adults that yes, I am needed here. I am useful here. I have the ability to have an impact on a room full of 100 kids, and my section is these four. And who knows? I mean, people say all the time, if I can do good for one person, my life's worthwhile, right? Well, how about potentially four? How about potentially 100? How about just taking that development, taking that growth, taking what you have been working on internally to better yourself for so long and sharing it with a young person and seeing that young person come alive? I'm telling you, Dr. Pat, there's few things greater. I mean, I'm a parent. Like I said, I talk about four kids, and being a dad, I've had a lot of successes in my life. Written through three books. I'm a pilot, business owner, all that stuff, right? All the stuff is great. I feel great about it. I feel good doing it still. But my kids, those beings, those children, best thing that I've ever done. And a lot of adults, when they work with kids, have a similar feeling that there is nothing better that I could have done with my life than to share and uplift another soul and work within a system that is being built and developed that is designed to uplift those souls and let them express their individuality and step into their meaning and purpose at a very early stage in life that many of us weren't given the opportunity to.
It's true. Eric, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to really redirect this to the future. And what I mean by that, I'd love to know your closing message and to let people know what they can expect as this is an ongoing conversation. What do you want to leave people with? What's your personal message? And thank you for all that you're doing.
My personal message is wherever you are is perfect. All of the work that you've done to better yourself, to develop and to fortify the connection you have with whatever you consider your higher power, that is perfect. And especially if you are wondering, what's the next step? What's the next piece? Why can't I just get to that last spot? What is it? Is it another meditation retreat? Is it this book over here? Is it this YouTube guru over here? Yeah, maybe it is. But what if it's taking what you've already done, that perfection that you've already achieved, and you can't really acknowledge it yet because you really can't feel it because you haven't shared it? We teach sometimes what we most need to learn, and sometimes it's a simultaneous combustion of actually sharing that knowledge and achieving enlightenment. That has been my experience with it. As soon as we give it away, we become everything we've been seeking. How about that for a possibility?
I
Join
love it.
us. This is a journey that we're taking and it doesn't end.
Now, people are going to be able to go to your website. They're going to be able to find a lot of things coming up here for you. And they're going to be able to watch your show every other week. This is really part of a conversation. It's a progressive conversation for all the reasons you talked about today. Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Pat, and thank you for the opportunity to share this because it's so important. It's so passionate, it's fun, and it's joyful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, nothing better than to see the faces of young people that finally can see hope. Mm.
Yeah,
Thank you,
and but
Eric.
not without challenge. Thank you, Dr. Pat.
Yeah, yeah. What don't kill you make you. This is what Mama Doris used to say, girls. She used to say, girls, what don't kill you make you stronger. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Have a
Yes.
good one.
Thank you for joining me, Eric S. Lee, on the Spiritual Justice Show. You've heard me say it before. Restorative justice alone can't get us there. Repairing a wound matters, but if the system keeps cutting, the wounds return. Social justice fights for equity, but if we forget the human spirit, policy feels hollow. Transformative justice shifts culture, but without compassion, the changes just don't last. That's why spiritual justice completes the circle. It heals the heart while changing the system. It restores dignity while shifting culture. It brings spirit back into justice. And that's where you come in. Tune in each first and third Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time on the Transformation Network as we rise up, spiritual justice warriors. This means you choosing courage, compassion, and creativity in a call to action. Until next time, walk with courage, lead with compassion, live with spirit, because justice begins here in the soul, and it continues with warriors like us. Join our community at spiritualjustice.net.